Well, hello everybody, Dave Lisson here. Welcome to you all. And first of all, can I thank you so much for spending your precious time on a Sunday evening to come and visit me at this webinar. It really is a great pleasure for me to introduce our new PRINCE2 2017 webinar on management by exception and tolerance. Bit of a mouthful, I know. Now, the focus on this webinar will be to give you all the knowledge and skills that you need in order for you to confidently answer any of those pesky management by exception tolerance related foundation or practitioner exam questions. Now, in order to do so, I will be sharing with you in this webinar some advanced thinking with regard to both MBE and tolerance. So first, a little bit of simple housekeeping. Now, I did a trial run and I expect this presentation will take around 45 minutes. And it will be a bit of a wild ride, so do buckle up and pay special attention. If it's possible, if you can turn off your cell phones and any other distractions so you can concentrate on what we're going to be covering. Now, as a way of thanking you for your attendance, and I really do appreciate it in your time, I will be offering you a very special deal at the end of my presentation. Now, it's only available for those like yourselves who are here today. And I'm afraid it's for a limited time and number. It'll be first come, first served. But hey, let's get to that much later. Let's get stuck into the meat and potatoes right now. So this is going to be 5 steps to mastering PRINCE2 management by exception, which of course includes tolerance. Now, what we'll be covering here is 5 key points. First of all, what exactly management by exception is with regards to PRINCE2, of course, and why folks often don't get it, and how tolerance should be allocated. You'll find the way in which it's mentioned in the manual isn't all that clear. I'll be sharing with you the real tolerance drivers, as well as some hidden tolerance types and levels. They're hiding in plain sight, of course, but you'll see what I mean when I get to that. And ending up with the SMART method to apply both management by exception and tolerance. So let me start at the beginning, fairly simple, and talk about tolerances and exceptions so that you understand the relationship between the two. Looking top left here, tolerances are the permissible deviation above and below each project objective. And there's 6 of those, as you probably know, without escalating the deviation to the next level of management. I'll show you that in a minute. Basically, tolerance comes from the word tolerate. It's some small deviations that the next level above can tolerate. Everything must have some variation from perfect plan. Now, this is actually one of the PRINCE2 principles, and an exception is defined as a situation where it can be forecast. Write that word down. Forecast is quite key, that there will be a deviation beyond the agreed tolerance levels. I like to use the analogy of driving along a motorway or freeway, and you can see in the middle distance some red lights, so you know something's going on. You would start to take some form of action to slow down so that you don't crash into the cars. Well, that's why you need to forecast tolerance. You don't wait until you've blown it. More of that in a moment. So first of all, you'll have recognized this from the PRINCE2 manual, I'm sure. There are actually 4 management levels. The top one is actually outside of PRINCE2, if you will. It's the bottom 3 which we'll be focusing on. But let me deal with this one at a time so you're absolutely clear. Starting at the top, well, it depends on the environment in which your project's being run. PRINCE2 uses the word corporate, meaning senior management, typically if your project's being run within your organization. However, your project may be part of a program forming many other projects, in which case your sponsors, if you will be program management, possibly the program manager or the program director, also known as the senior executive officer. And then the third type of environment within which you may find yourself is it's actually delivering a customer project. It may be the customer is paying for it, I would imagine, in which case those folks would be at the top layer of management. Now, here's the point. It's only at corporate program management or customer, it's those folks that can set project level tolerances. Key point. It's also those folks who issue the mandate and trigger PRINCE2 into life in the first place. Coming down below that, you have the project board, and the project board can only set stage level tolerances. Now, when the project manager produces the project plan forming part of the PID. I'm sure you're aware of that. If not, it's the project initiation documentation. It will be agreed how many management stages this project will include. So even though the project manager will be helping to design exactly how many of those exist, I'm afraid the project manager only gets the project released to him or her one stage at a time. So when planning, I beg your pardon, when starting to sign off the next stage plan, the project board will set stage level tolerance. Coming down to the project manager, therefore, the project manager must deliver that stage within the tolerance bounds. Coming to the lowest level, and this is only lowest in managerial terms, you've got what I call the talent. The team manager looks after those creating the specialist products. There is, as the manual says, an optional tolerance that you can put around work packages. I'd like you to make a note of the fact that I don't believe that's optional. The only time it might be optional is if, for example, where the team manager and the specialist team are under a contract, in which case the contract's terms and conditions would probably lay down what, if any, tolerances exist. Okay, moving on. So what you get going down the management chain are the tolerances set by the level above, as I've said. What about going up? Well, you need to keep them informed. So the team manager responsible for the work package tolerances will give progress reports to the project manager. In PRINCE2, these are called checkpoints. Similarly, the project manager will give progress reports to the project board, and these are called highlight reports. The former, that the work packages and the checkpoints will typically be weekly, although it could be any other time, and the project manager gives a highlight report, typically monthly, but yet again, it depends on what the project board wants. Now, the project board consists of three roles, as I'm about to share with you. It's the project board executive that will normally be in contact, or at least communicate with senior management, shown here as corporate program management and the customer. Indeed, the highlight reports that the project manager produces may be given to them as copies as a matter of default, or any other senior stakeholders. Now, look top left at that blue box where I've said project objective. I said there's 6 of them, and I'm sure you know what they are. Here they are. It just so happens, and this is not an accident, that for each project objective, you would have a type of tolerance set around it. You'll notice I've highlighted the time and cost tolerance. The reason being is because that's often the most usual one that's chosen. Now, I've got a particular view on that, so here's some tough love. It could be, if you quickly read the PRINCE2 manual, you'd come away with the opinion that you'd choose, quote unquote, the tolerances you want. Yes, let's have time and cost, say senior management, because of course they're used to time and cost, running new endeavors against the budget and so on. But they mustn't just use it as default. What they must do is think about all 6 of those objectives. And I'll put to you all that what you should be doing is setting tolerances for all of them. Now, look at my pink box here. If tolerances for these are not stated, they are assumed as infinity or 0. Okay, that's got you thinking, hasn't it? Suppose that the project board, or indeed corporate, only set time and cost. What are we to assume about scope? Now, suppose they said infinity. Are they really meaning that they don't care whether you don't deliver everything, or that you gold plate everything and the project budget goes through the roof? I'm sure not. But what if scope was 0? Now, the reason why that's a problem is because if it's 0, it only wants scope to change by, a hair's breadth. And what happens? You're now in exception. The project manager, let's say, must bring this to the attention of the project board. The corollary of this is that if these other types of tolerances aren't set, then the project board will get lots of daily visits from the project manager every time you predict you're going to overspend by $1 or €1 or what have you. And similarly, if you're going to be 3 hours late. So as we go through this presentation, I'll be sharing with you the way to use that in a smarter way altogether. Now, you may have seen this. It's been around for at least a decade, and I think it makes the point quite well. And that's the analogy of 6 dogs on a leash. There's our poor project manager in the center being pulled every which way but loose by the dogs. Now, let's assume the one top right is our scope dog. If that scope dog suddenly sees a cat or is attracted to something and pulls to the right, then the other dogs will also be affected. Put simply, it's a nice analogy to keep in your mind that if any one of those 6 types of tolerances and hence objectives are changed externally or can't be met for whatever reason, it's almost certainly to affect the others. Make a note of that. Just going and revisiting that little diagram that I've created, it's there on the right hand side. Corporate tolerances, yes, it makes it a lot easier than saying all of them. It's these folks who set the project requirements, and that of course is within the project mandate, and they also set project level tolerances. Do remember that. I've seen so many folks in the exam getting fooled into thinking that the project board can set project tolerances. No, they can't. And there we have our corporate program management or customer out playing golf. A nice thought, and it'll help you keep this in mind. However, you can bet your life if they've got their smartphone in their back pocket, they won't think much of the project board forever ringing them and interrupting their game of golf. Coming down to the project board, they, of course, as you now know, set stage level tolerances. And there's our 3 heroes at the project board: the executive role, always one individual, the senior supplier role, and the senior user role, all shaking hands with the project manager. Now, the project board has project level control as long as the forecast remains within project tolerance. That I don't think is said loud enough in the official manual. It really does mean that if you forecast that any tolerance, whoever you are, is going to be breached, exceeded, you no longer have authority to continue. It's your duty to bring it to the attention of the next level of management. So it's the project board who allocate tolerances for each management stage to the project manager, as I've said. The project board, like any of the other owners of tolerance levels, have the ability to review the progress thus far and decide, possibly, whether to remove the cause of a problem. For example, you may be forecasting tolerances are to be exceeded because overtime rates have just gone up. Well, they might say, well, in this case, we'll charge them at the same amount when we originally planned it. They could continue. There's an interesting one. You could decide, okay, so you've breached tolerances. We'll set them a little wider. Continue. Whatever you do, don't stop work. Or they could change in some way, like reducing the scope or something, or even, if they think it's serious enough, stop the project. So the project board may request the project manager to produce an exception plan for the project. More on that in the next slide, where I'll lay out the steps of this escalation I've talked about. First of all, let's deal with our hero, the project manager. Now, this guy or gal has the day-to-day control for a management stage, of course, within the tolerance limits laid down by the project board. Now, look at those 3 little icons there. The project manager, if for whatever reason forecast tolerances are to be exceeded, will raise an issue report initially to capture and analyze the situation. He or she will then raise an exception report. Now, what an exception report broadly says: I'm forecasting to exceed tolerances. Here's the root cause why that's occurred. Here's 1 or 2 options I've come up with. This is the project manager speaking. And out of those options, here would be my recommendation. Okay. Now, so if during the execution of a stage plan, any forecast indicates that the management stage is likely to exceed the agreed management stage tolerances, you now know what's going to happen. Then that deviation should be referred to the project board by the project manager in order to get a decision on corrective action. So as you go up the chain, it's corrective action you're looking for. Be clear, this is not just a mere deviation that's still within tolerance. I'll come to that shortly. This is where you're forecasting tolerance will be breached. And of course, here's the complete story. The issue register will also have this entered into it. The exception report will go up to the project board, and the ball is firmly in their court. They need to make a decision on what to do next. They could do any of those things I mentioned in the previous slide, but they could also, and typically would hope, ask for an exception plan. And this is held at a meeting called an exception assessment, or EXA. Now, I'm not here to talk about all of that information, otherwise we'd be 2 hours. But what's important is you understand the link between management by exception and the escalation path. So let's now come down another level to the team manager tolerances. And by the way, we haven't finished tolerances yet by a long chalk. Well, the team manager has control for a work package. but only within the work package tolerances agreed with the project manager. Let me take you back a step here. The project board will review the stage plan at an end stage assessment, hopefully approve it, and then set tolerances for the stage. The first thing the project manager will do once that has happened is to give out a work package to the specialist team, and there may be many of them. And at that point, work package tolerances would be agreed with the project manager. It's a contract, if you will, of understanding. And the work package will have all the information necessary for the team to escalate this, should it be necessary, to the project manager. So if during execution of the work package, a forecast, there's that key word again, indicates that the agreed tolerances will be exceeded, then the deviation should be referred to the project manager by the team manager in order to get a decision on what the project manager will do in terms of corrective action in this case. Now, here's the point I want you to write down or at least memorize. It's only the project manager that raises the so-called exception report that I described in the previous slide. What the work package folks do, the specialist team who are making the products, they would simply raise it as an issue. I've put exception report in quotes there, merely saying the issue would describe the typical information you'd find in an exception report. Now, the reason for this is not exactly stated, but I can tell you for now, what you don't want is everyone raising exception reports. Remember, this is happening within a management stage. The project manager is in control of that. If one or more of the teams forecast that work package tolerances to be exceeded, they bring it to the attention of the project manager swiftly via an issue register. Then the project manager, in the bigger scope of the stage, makes a decision what to do next. Okay? So it's the project manager who will advise of any corrective actions required. Now, moving on, you may recognize this diagram from the manual. And I have to tell you, it's a great way to teach new folks what tolerance is, using time and cost, because it's so graphic. However, it does have a downside. It locks people into thinking whenever tolerance is used, time and cost is what's chosen, and the rest you ignore. I've already made the point about zero or infinity. But nevertheless, let's continue with this. You're probably familiar with this from what you've seen. Notice the plan line shown as a simple spend plan. I've shown it linear. Of course, it never is. It's more like a shallow S-curve. And you can see by the dotted lines there, it's showing a certain budget, let's imagine for the stage, and a time. Let's make it easy, say £100,000 for the budget and 10 weeks for the duration of the stage. What will happen here is the project manager, I beg your pardon, the project board, since it's a stage, will put tolerances around it. And tolerances are always plus and minus. Make a note of that. And here I've shown them on this diagram. Now, what happens now? The project manager is giving out the work packages and work is taking place, which means you're spending money and spending time too. And it might look a little like this. What the project manager will want to do on a regular basis is to compare what's actually occurred against the plan. And in this case, I've deliberately shown some difference, quite normal. Now, the project manager needs to work out what's going on here. Does that mean we're overspending, or does it mean we're spending more because we've done more? So in actual fact, we're going to finish early. Now, within the project manager's remit, you have the PRINCE2 process called controlling a stage. And there's two activities that you should pay attention to there. If the project manager thinks that they can bring that back and keep it within tolerance, they would use the take corrective action activity. But what the project manager will also be doing is reviewing stage status, another activity within the controlling a stage process. And on the basis of that, and by the way, earned value analysis or earned value management is an excellent way of forecasting the future. And let's assume that's what's going on. Well, in this case, whew, it's okay. You're still coming within tolerance, even though you've chewed up a little bit of tolerance. You're getting closer to the upper limit of cost, but you're still doing okay. Now, such small deviations would be included in the next highlight report. You see, the project manager doesn't go running and panic into the project board and say, oh, I've used up 3% of your tolerances. No, you carry on doing what you're doing, controlling and monitoring the stage. But the next highlight report, such deviations would be shown just to keep the project board informed. What happens, though, if Horror of horrors, the project manager forecasts that tolerance is to be exceeded. Again, I'm just using time and cost here because it's a nice, powerful way of showing it. You can see all those little red crosses are definitely, any single one of those situations would cause tolerance to be exceeded. Now, what must the project manager do? Yeah, I'm sure you remember, raise an issue report, create an exception report, and bring it to the attention of the project board to get a decision on what to do next. You see, directly tolerance is forecast to be exceeded. The project manager no longer has the authority to proceed. He or she must bring it to the attention of the project board. Now, an exception report can initially be a phone call to each project board member. I'm asked this so often in my classes. Yes, but management are busy, yada, yada, yada. It takes them days to respond. Well, how about the project manager getting off his rear end or her rear end and walking to the project board and saying, I'm about to forecast with blown tolerance. Here's what my initial thoughts are. Have you got any initial thoughts? Otherwise, wait for my exception report. And an exception report could be created in merely just a few hours. Although, when looking at the options, you may want to involve the specialist team. So it could take several days. So giving them a quick communication to the project board and telling them what's going on would be a smart way to manage this. Now, here's some other horror stories from my war world of being a project manager. Do beware of managers setting narrow tolerances. I'm talking about usually senior managers here. Excuse me. Maybe on the project board, maybe up at corporate. You see, it's your job and duty as a current PRINCE2 practitioner to actually keep these folks informed and to help educate them. Now, here's the reason why managers set narrow tolerances. It's just a matter of they don't understand PRINCE2. They're so used to the command and control approach, money, cost, time, and everything else, that's what they immediately go to. And whenever they think about that, they sort of believe that tolerance is some form of slush fund. If you're not familiar with that term, it's just a piece of jargon. Really, it means that it's there to cover up sloppy management and, I don't know, Friday afternoon drink sessions down the pub, whatever. So they'll think, this isn't tolerance at all. I don't really understand tolerance. I'm not going to give this project manager lots of extra money to hide his inadequacies. So that's the bit you need to educate them. They need to know that tolerance is nothing more than a trigger point, and it allows the next management level up to work far more efficiently and effectively, because frankly, they're not getting interrupted every 5 minutes for small, insignificant deviations. Another main point here is if it's ever possible, not always, but mostly, don't stop your team from working while decisions are being made about tolerance. In fact, I've got a little trick I've been using for some years now, and that's to, as you get the stage plan approved with the project board and they set tolerance, negotiate, and I've suggested 48 hours, could be another number, negotiate a 48-hour continuance period once you get the stage plan approved. So that if you do find, as my left-hand diagram shows, your forecasting tolerance to be exceeded, then at least you don't have to stop the team from working. Just think about it. It'll reduce morale, not to mention probably increase mistakes if you stop them and then start again 2 days later. That's when errors can occur. Now, the dark side. This, again, isn't mentioned too much in the manual. And by the way, it sounds like I'm going badly at the manual here. The manual is a reference. It's not an education source. So to be fair to them, they've done a reasonable job on it. But I ask you, as you can see the question here, underspending and early is good, right? Well, I suppose it really depends on how much underspending and how much early. And this is where I come into the dark side. Now, do you remember those 6 tolerance types, if you will? Well, I'm not going to cover the easy ones, like I realize I'm going to overspend the budget. It's fairly obvious that you'll raise an exception report and bring it to the attention of management because it's fairly obvious it needs to be done. But what about underspending? So that's the piece I want to discuss to start with. Now, starting with coming in significantly early. The key word here is significantly. You need to define what that means. And of course, it's tolerance, isn't it? Suppose that you remember that stage was 10 weeks. Supposing you came in after 5 weeks. Well, The next layer of management might say, well, you've been tying up all these resources. We could have used those on other projects or other initiatives. And hey, if you got it so badly wrong, what went wrong with your estimating? Now, let me make an important point. Please write this down. When you bring a tolerance breach to the attention of the next management level, it should never be seen as failure, but rather best practice, because you recognize you must immediately bring the next layer in so that with their authority, they can make the right decisions swiftly. So coming in significantly early could be a red rag here. It is a potential trigger, and you ought to bring it to the attention of the project board, whatever significantly means, simply because they may want to use the money elsewhere. And it's pretty much the same for time and costs. What about funding other initiatives? Have you heard something called padding? Well, it's when you do estimating and you add, let's say, 10% just in case. It's really risk management, and a poor one at that. You shouldn't be using padding. But if you're significantly underspending the budget, like, for example, you only need £50,000 rather than £100,000, again, you've got a similar problem to when you come in significantly early. The point I'm making here is it's triggers. And look at the dark side as well, because that'll give you a richer communication with the next level of management, and you'll be able to choose make a better choice with your tolerances, both the types and the levels. What about if you don't need all the products? What on earth does that mean? Well, it actually means that your customer maybe said that what they originally asked for isn't necessary. Well, that needs to be brought to their attention, wouldn't you agree? And if you're thinking that sounds like an off-specification issue, you'd be right, but that'll be for another day and another webinar. But just keeping the focus on tolerance here, if you don't need all the products, what went wrong with the top requirements, for example? Did you use prioritization in terms of each of the products? Yes or no? There obviously needs to be questions answered here, so that would cause you and should cause you to escalate this particular situation. And I think you can see what's happening now with risk. Now, what you would normally do is to set up some form of risk budget. Now, that might be built into the project budget, or it may be separate. And if it's separate, that's a smart thing to do because you can keep control of it much easier. But hey, what's a risk budget for? Well, it's to manage risks, and it's to manage any responses to risks. And if you've got significantly less risk, you probably don't need so many risk responses. So maybe you don't need so much risk budget either. And going back to the initiation stage, remember every PRINCE2 project has at least 2 stages. And the first is always the initiation stage, which is where the PID is assembled. And within the PID, you have 4, they used to be called strategies, but now they're called approaches, more correctly, in my opinion. You've got the risk management approach. That's the approach you're taking to management of risk in this project. And if you suddenly find that you are forecasting significant less risk in terms of risk tolerance, that too needs to be brought to the attention of the next level of management. Here's the final 2 of all the 6. This is an interesting one. Too much quality. I'm sure you've come across the term gold plating. Anyone who ever says that quality doesn't cost is not quite telling the truth. Making something of a high quality, you need to define what that means, does need to be quantified, and it will cost money. So have you done gold plating if you're now delivering too much quality? And do remember the cost of quality. The point I'm making here is that all of these are potential exception triggers. Too much quality, do you remember the 6 dogs? Will almost certainly be impacting time and cost. And the final one there is exceeding the benefits. Well, within the business case, you carry out an investment appraisal. Now, you could use one of many financial tools here: cost benefit analysis, return on investment, etc., etc. But the business case should be, in effect, a set of scales, balancing time and cost, if you will, on one side against risk on the other, and making sure the benefits are delivered. Now, if you're now exceeding the amount of benefits, you'd think, wow, that's your sales team's best dream. You know, wow, we can sell much more now. But because of that, maybe you need to look at benefits management. This is another approach document that is created. And the benefits management shows exactly when you're going to measure the benefits, how are you going to measure them, what metrics, in other words, who's going to do the measuring, and so on. And benefits, unless it's an agile type of project, will often not be realized until the project's been completed and the end product has been in operational use for some period of time. So would you agree too, I'm sure you do, that this also is an exception trigger that needs to be brought to the next level of management? So my message on this slide is think through the root causes and the consequences. I hope what I'm building here in your mind is a far more mature approach to the use of management by exception, and in particular, tolerance. Okay, a couple of slides now to remind you in a bit more detail of these different types of tolerances. But before I go into that, can you see that big L-shaped blue box? It says no product level tolerances. Now, what this means is that whenever you create a product in PRINCE2, the Americans would call it a deliverable, you first create a product description, and it forms part of PRINCE2's technique called product-based planning. And within each product description, it will have the quality tolerances, nothing else. So what I'm saying here, before we start looking at time, cost, and scope, you don't have any product level tolerances within such product descriptions. I beg your pardon, you don't have any time, cost, and scope tolerances within a product description. Let me take a drink of water. Okay, let's run them down. Time tolerance, where do you place that? Well, at project level, so you put it in the project plan, at stage level, in the stage plan, and at work package level. Okay, and what this normally looks like is a plus or minus time of on target completion dates, much like I showed you in that previous slide. Now, when it comes to cost, you've got a very similar story. Look, there's the three: project plan, stage plan, and work package. All could have cost tolerances put in them, but in this case, of course, it's plus or minus cost of planned budget. Scope starts to get a bit interesting. Let's see how this goes. Yes, it's still got those three documents: project plan, stage plan, and work package. All of those can have scope tolerance set. Now, what is scope tolerance? Well, it's what's included and what isn't. Look over the right-hand side there against scope. I've said scope variation of the project solution. In other words, what products are in, what products are out. Now, if you're still getting to grips with product-based planning, you might be thinking of features or functionality. And are you going to include that function? Well, of course, that would be in direct response to the product description, wouldn't it? Okay. Now, one of the ways in which you can prioritize it is a technique called Moscow, or as Americans would say, Moscow. And it stands for must have, should have, could have, or won't have. Well, the won't have has no relevance here. So it's really the must have, should have, and could have. And the idea here is that a must have must be delivered. A should have could be delivered, even though, and it could be acceptable by the project manager. A could have might have some impact. Now, again, I'm not here to talk about prioritization in detail. Just be aware that's what occurs. So how do you go about this? Well, the trick is, as I've said, reference the product breakdown structure of the relevant plan. Here's a nice little cartoon, if you will, showing a product hierarchy. Notice bottom right, I've put an orange box there. That could, for example, could be a could have product. In other words, providing you delivered all the rest, but you couldn't deliver that little orange one, that would still be acceptable. Can you see the point I'm making here? So by using prioritization, you can actually add in scope tolerance. Make sense? Good. Let's move on. Next, let's look at risk in a similar way. Now, in risk, there's also no product level tolerances. Let me make the point. If you open up a product description of a product that your specialist team are going to make, you'll only find quality tolerances in there. You won't find risk tolerances. It would have no meaning. But look at those documents that I've mentioned here. There's something called the risk management approach, one of the 4 approach documents within the PID. And this says for this particular project, how you intend to approach the management of risk, fairly obviously. And within there, you'll have risk tolerances. Obviously, the approach you choose will have a bearing on what risk tolerances are set. You've probably heard of something called risk appetite. Small startup companies often have got quite high risk appetite because, frankly, it's high risk stuff. But a large traditional organization, perhaps in the pharmaceutical industry or a bank, they would have a very low tolerance to risk. And that would obviously impact greatly the approach taken to managing risk. Now, the stage plan and work package, these would have limits on aggregated value of threats. I need to explain that. Let me just give you a little 101 on risk management. How you define a risk is something called its severity. Is the risk severe or not? And the way in which you come up with severity is you multiply the probability of a risk occurring times its impact. So if you said to yourself, there's a 10% chance of rain tomorrow, but it's okay, I've got an umbrella, then obviously that's a fairly not very severe risk. Would you agree? And the converse would be true as well. Now, what's this word aggregated? Well, it works like this. Suppose you have 10 risks, risk 1, risk 2, risk 3. On risk 1, you recognize that if it occurred, it would increase cost by £1,000. And there's a 10% chance of it happening. Multiplying those together, you would have £100, which is the severity of the risk. If you did the same thing for risk 2, risk 3, risk 4, and add up all the severities, they are what's known as the aggregated value of threats. And you'd often use that directly as to calculate and set up your risk budget. So in other words, that's how you could approach risk tolerance. If the aggregated value exceeds some preset amount, that's when you raise an exception report. But wait, I haven't finished. There's another way of dealing with this. You see, when you have a risk, you could merely call up particular specifically named risks like risk 5. And you could then say, by setting tolerance, something along the lines of, if that exceeds 20% likelihood, raise an exception report, because it's a very severe risk. Or conversely, if the impact would change by some significant amount. Can you see what I'm getting at here? So you could use aggregated, the impact, and the probability to come up with a risk amount. Now, quality is an interesting one. Notice it's not defined at stage or work package level. Why? Because it's only sorted at product level. However, that is contained within the product description, which you can see there. It defines the quality targets in terms of ranges. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a very important document first created within the project brief called the project product description. This defines the end product of your project. And within the project product description, you'll have two key pieces of information. The first is the customer's quality expectations. This will be generic, like it needs to be fast or it needs to be easy to clean. But then you'll also have the acceptance criteria. And it's the acceptance criteria that you put quality tolerance around, because the acceptance criteria must be measurable. So now you can talk about speed in perhaps, let's say, milliseconds. It must be 40 milliseconds plus or minus 5 milliseconds or some such. More on quality in a minute. If you come from a technical background, you'll know what I'm coming to, but just let me deal with benefits first. The benefit tolerance is only at project level and it's in the business case. Therefore, no product level tolerance is there either. Now, what this does is it defines target benefits in terms of ranges. Benefits can just about anything. Very often, though, in a commercial organization, benefits will talk about things like sales figures or income, and that's okay. But there are many other types of benefits. Again, I won't go into more detail, but I want you to be aware of the fact that there are something within PRINCE2 called a disbenefit. Write that down if it's unfamiliar to you. It's a strange word, isn't it? I can't even find it in the dictionary, but I know what it means, and it's a good thing to have because it makes sure the business case is balanced and realistic. Now, here's a simple example of a disbenefit. The benefit is we're going to automate, let's say, a help desk so we can respond to customer inquiries much quicker. A disbenefit would be we'll have to retrain the existing staff because they won't be needed on that anymore, or unfortunately even let them go. That's a disbenefit. What do you do with a benefit? You try and make it so. You work very hard to maximize benefits. What do you do to disbenefits? You work very hard to actually reduce them, hopefully to zero. But you do expect them. A disbenefit is not a risk. It's something that's going to happen as a consequence of getting those important benefits. I said I'd have a chat about quality. You'll certainly know about functional and non-functional requirements. So I'm probably teaching my granny here to suck eggs for most of you, but I just picked out a very simple one here. Any requirement that specifies what the system should do. That's a functional requirement. And I've just used a plastic cup, for example, the ability to contain tea or coffee without leaking. Would you buy a cup that leaks only slightly? I don't think so. So you could perhaps put quality tolerances around functional requirements. But a more better approach, often, I offer this as a piece of advice that you may take, is the non-functional requirement. These are often more useful because they specify how the system performs a certain function. And I've used a safety margin here for a cup. Must contain hot liquid without heating up to more than 45 degrees centigrade. Now, it may well be that that could have some small variation and still meet the satisfaction of the customer. So there's an idea about setting quality tolerances. Now on to hidden tolerances. Now you may recognize that diagram that I've put there. It's called the tolerance corridor. And notice where the red text box is pointing. It's a trigger to raise an exception report, even though the stage is still predicted to be within tolerance bounds. What it shows is at the very beginning of the stage, you may well find that you're well within tolerances, but as you build up through it, you can still be predicting to be within tolerance, as that red dotted line shows, although ultimately it does go outside. But having a corridor allows you to pre-think trend information, and that's really what it is. Starting top left there, optimism and wishful thinking may lead to a false forecast. You know the old story, we're getting behind team, gosh, we ought to be forecasting tolerances to be exceeded, but never mind, I'm sure we can make it up later. And the answer is the corridor will normally prove you wrong. On the right-hand side there, this could be based on work package level only. Now there's a thought. You see, you don't need to have tolerances at every level. You could be using the corridor just at work package. What about the idea of having stage tolerance divided across 2 or even more products? And finally, if you're using Scrum or Agile, you could have stage tolerances divided across sprints and time boxes. Just some ideas here about some of the, I've called it hidden tolerances. What I'm really doing here is teasing some ideas out that you might like to think about with your real projects. But my warning, top right, take care not to micromanage. It's very easy to get over enthusiastic about setting tolerances everywhere. If you've got lots and lots of data going in, you'll need lots and lots of data going out, and you'll end up managing data instead of managing the project. But there is some good ideas here about the way in which you could set tolerances at lower levels. Okay. So you could consider verbal reporting for any mid-tolerance breaches. I think that's a good idea, don't you? Particularly if you're using some of these lower levels. Keep the paperwork to a minimum, say I. So the tolerance corridor, keeping on to that, you have an option to include tolerance lines on the S-curve, as I've said. If it's forecast the tolerance corridor is to be exceeded, even though the stage is still predicted to be complete, then an exception report is raised. I think you've got that quite clearly now. Now, here's another thought which you might get tripped up on, those tricky practitioner level questions. The project manager cannot store up or steal remaining tolerance from previous or future management stages. The only person, or rather management level, that can do that is the owners who set the tolerance, not the folks that work within it, if you see the point I'm making. A good example here is, say you've got a 4-stage project and you're at the end of the 3rd management stage planning the final stage plan. Suppose you haven't used anything like as much tolerances in previous stages as you thought. It could be tempting to load it all up on the final stage. Well, that would turn tolerance into a slush fund, wouldn't it? The whole point of tolerance is there as a trigger. So you probably wouldn't want to do that. The project board should be thinking, we've saved some money here. Let's just put it by, because it may be needed on other things. Whatever you do, do not take tolerance excesses and load it into risks, into risk budgets or issue budgets or change budgets. That's not what it's there to do. Keep them distinctly separate. So this is an option for the tolerance owner, but not for the person who's running against that tolerance. Now, a quick word about tolerance change budgets and risk budgets, often confused. Don't mix tolerance funds with risk and change budgets, the point I've just made. Now, tolerance, as you now know, is built into a plan, to allow such small plus or minus problems and or estimating errors. That's what it's there for, isn't it? If you and I could estimate perfectly and produce a perfect plan, well, I'm still waiting. So there will always be some errors and problems, and that's what it's there to do. A risk budget is there to pay for time and resources within a contingency plan should a linked risk occur, okay? Distinct and separate from tolerance. And similarly, a change budget is there to pay for approved changes, not to be used for tolerance. Let me make the point here. If a change or risk budget is not given, and that often can be the case, you just get the project budget, then tolerance will be eaten into, or it can be. Let me show you what I mean. Let's imagine using cost here. There it is. There's your budget amount, whatever that is, and you have a plus or minus amount of tolerance. If, let's suppose, some changes occur or some risks get worse and you need to spend money and time on them, then what will happen is it will munch into your tolerance. So watch out for that. That's what you've missed, and that's what will happen. So be aware that when you're using tolerance and you haven't got a change or risk budget, the project manager in particular should pay special attention to trends and make sure that tolerance isn't suddenly being chewed up by the use of risks or changes. Now, finally, what I've called the SMART modification. Now, this is a mindset much as anything else, and it brings together all the thoughts I've given you thus far. What this is a set of independent yet interacting control criteria. That's exactly what your 6 tolerances are, aren't they? All must be considered and their tolerance stated. Do you remember the 0 and infinity? So just a schematic here. There's time shown on a continuum, and you would set up some form of tolerance band. I've really shown plus or minus about the same, but it's just a concept. What you'd want to do is to think about that in isolation. And I think you know what's coming in a similar way for costs. Again, I've shown that somewhere on the cost with a plus or minus amount. Don't forget, although I've said you must choose all 6 tolerances and set what they are, some of them may be 0. For example, if you're delivering a project for an exhibition and an exhibition date is fixed, then really there's no plus deviation in time, is there? Only minus. So that might happen. Similarly with scope, you know about Moscow now, the tolerance band that you can use to prioritize, again, some form of plus or minus. And risk, either using aggregated risks, as I said, or named risks. And quality, using the acceptance criteria within the project product description or the quality criteria within specific product descriptions. And finally, benefits. Don't forget your benefits and disbenefits. I've made a point of there. And it's the business case within which you'd set benefit tolerances. Okay, good. Well, I think that just about brings us to the end of this. So well done. Now, just give me 2 more minutes of your time. You are now already very competent to answer any exam questions on PRINCE2 2017 tolerance. Believe me. However, it may well be that what you'll now want to do is to focus on becoming a competent PRINCE2 practitioner. And that should be your focus here, by first passing your exams and becoming a PRINCE2 practitioner. Now, in order to become a PRINCE2 practitioner, just like you are now, I found the PRINCE2 manual overwhelming. That was way back in 1996. I can remember getting the night sweats at the time. I opened it up and all I could see was a sea of text. Now, classroom training is often rushed. It has to be. You can only be let out the office for 5 days at the most. You therefore get a very high learning curve, lacking a lot of detail, and frankly, it's exhausting. You only find out when you get there that you've got to work 3 hours into the evening, as well as phone up your boss and your family, etc. And it's certainly stressful. I too remember I was panicking. I really was mentally numb. I can remember exactly where I was standing the night before my exam. But you know what was keeping me frightened? It was embarrassed of failure. I had to go back into the office and tell everyone, oh, I didn't make it, knowing full well several had already done it. So I knew that doing nothing was an option. Now I've got to share with you a little bit of my private life here. I had to change because failure would have severe career and salary consequences for me. Believe me, that was the case. However, I got lucky. My tipping point was a pre-exam coaching session, only 1.5 days, I might add, and training from one of the examiners of PRINCE2. No. They didn't give me the answers. They merely put aside, bless their heart, it was an individual, I still remember his name, time to help me get through. And I'm telling you, the results were astounding. I scored 91% in my PRINCE2 practitioner exam. I am proud of that. I remember the number. I was mentally, emotionally, fully prepared because of that, and my high score was easy enough for me to become an accredited PRINCE2 trainer. And I've been one since, well, a couple of months after that point. It was, believe me, a great feeling. So becoming a PRINCE2 practitioner, you too can get your hands on that same detailed PRINCE2 2017 Masterclass today. Who's your PRINCE2 journeyman? It's me in this case. You get 18 modules with 18 supporting handbooks. Within each module, you'll have half a dozen detailed lessons in short, easy, 20-minute bite-sized chunks. You'll also get my PRINCE2 2018 Foundation and Practitioner Exam simulator with questions, answers, and rationale. Because these are streaming videos, they're device independent, and as long as you've got an internet connection, you can prepare for your exam wherever you are. So you can deep dive into my 1-hour PRINCE2 2017 roadmap video. I call that out in particular because I used to do that when I ran classroom training many years ago, and everyone used to agree it was the most important thing in getting PRINCE2 processes and management products clearly in their minds. You get 18 modules complete with handbook, and as I said, you get 20-minute streaming video lessons. I ought to mention you get my Exam Cram and Exam Boost pass tools. You won't find these anywhere else. The Exam Cram will show you exactly what the examiner can ask you and what they can't, and the Exam Boost will help you get really good at passing exams, believe me. And the Foundation and Practitioner Exam Simulator, as I said, will give you all you need to practice. Look, I'll be blunt. PRINCE2 2017 Masterclass filters out the dross and confusion of the official manual, leaving you simply to absorb the essence of PRINCE2 and take it from me, fly through your exams. You'll be able to focus every moment of your valuable time and learning on absorbing the good stuff, leaving nothing to waste. I've done all the heavy lifting for you. Our PRINCE2 2017 Masterclass has all the tools you need to laser focus your learning and speed through your exams at your first try. Now, timing and critical mass is key here for the exam. You really do need to peak at the right time. I'm sure you've come across that before. And believe me, failure and retakes really do suck the life out of any student. We won't let that happen. But did you spot the major PRINCE2 2017 changes? Because this is important. There's the new manual, and it runs like a river throughout it, unlike the previous version, How to Tailor Prince. It's in all the processes and all the themes. No more is it just a chapter hidden at the back. You really do need to get good at tailoring. And the second major thrust is the use of Agile or Scrum. Now, Agile is the, if you will, high-level word for Agile approaches. Scrum is a very much more efficient way of applying Agile, particularly to PRINCE2. But it's for these reasons there are an extra 80 text-dense pages in this manual versus the old one. I'm afraid it's over 500 pages. But don't worry. Remember, at Projects Academy, you get lifetime access, which is great for if you're taking re-registration exams, any future reference when you get back into the office and you need to, if you like, revise on PRINCE2, ready for it. You'll have this here because it's there all the time for you for the rest of your life if you wish. But I've got a very special deal, and I'm afraid it's only available to you folks attending this webinar. So do pay attention. It's my triple bundle. Yes, it consists of my PRINCE2 Foundation and Practitioner Masterclass that I've just mentioned, and you get lifetime access. None of this you can study for 3 months or 6 months and then you don't get it anymore. The second part is my PRINCE2 Lite. It's tailoring PRINCE2 for small projects. There's nothing else like it out there. Check the internet. You'll find a few discussion forums talking about it, but nothing much. This is the ultimate PRINCE2 2017 tailoring guide. 150 minutes of streaming video tuition, my unique PRINCE2 blending guide, along with customized document templates. And the third and final bit is my PRINCE2 Scrum Masterclass. This is tailoring PRINCE2 to harness Agile techniques. You will not find another PRINCE2 Scrum training out there. Yet again, you get lifetime access. A quick look there, you can see you get my Scrum tailoring guide, 28 streaming video tuition, 4 accompanying handbooks. You get customized document templates, particularly tailored for Prince2 Scrum. And believe it or not, you get my Scrum Master sample exam. Now, taking the exam is up to you. That's a separate thing. But because the first part of this is actually making you very good at understanding and using Scrum, I've included a sample exam for you to test your newfound knowledge. Hey, can you think of any Prince2 practitioners and Scrum Masters in your organization? It would certainly make you stand out from the crowd. However, that's not all. You also get my Microsoft Project Sprint Tracker and Word tracking tools. It really is a superb bundle. Now, just imagine missing out on your opportunity to own this Prince2 triple bundle deal. Because as a way of saying thank you for your attendance here, I'm going to give you a massive 35% reduction. So this is a worldwide exclusive deal. It's not available anywhere from any Prince2 training provider, whether online or off. It's also a one-time offer, only available within this webinar at a 35% discount. Make a note of the coupon code there, WEB14. It can be uppercase or lowercase, WEB number 1 and 4. And this is for the first few customers only. So you can use this link to reserve your copy now. www.projects.com/webinar. Now, I am deleting this link and ending this bundle offer in 24 hours, so do act fast.